Good morning, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Now, firstly, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose ancestral lands the UTS City campus now stands. I would like to also pay respects to the elders, both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. Today's webinar is brought to you as part of UTS Orientation 2022 and by the UTS Young Alumni Committee. My name is Karen Zhang. I'm a UTS Business School alumni and founding member of the UTS Young Alumni Committee. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar with Nicky Sparshott, CEO of Unilever Australia and New Zealand. Before we get started, a bit of housekeeping for us. This session is being recorded and questions from the audience are encouraged. The format for today is a conversation with Nicky, sharing insights from her impressive career. We'll provide our audience with an opportunity to ask questions towards the end. You can submit your questions via the question box on the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to get as many as we can, and however, please understand that time may not allow for us to get through all of them. I'd now like to introduce our guest speaker. Nicky is the current CEO of Unilever Australia and New Zealand and former global CEO of luxury retailer T2T. She has over 25 years of experience in developing and building brands, growing businesses, and transforming infrastructure and culture. She has worked across a broad range of organizations, including beverage giant the Coca-Cola Amatil, multinational consumer goods firm Unilever and Procter & Gamble, and advertising agency George Patterson Y&R. Recognized for her depth and breadth of expertise across FMCG, that's fast-moving consumer goods, retail, luxury, and e-commerce, Nicky also brings experience with food, beverages, healthcare, and personal care. She holds a Bachelor of Business and Masters in International Business from UTS and has recently completed an Executive MBA in Change through INSEAD. Nicky is also a non-executive director on the boards of World Wildlife Fund Australia, Global Sisters, and the Australian Food and Grocery Council. She sits on the UTS Vice Chancellor's Industry Advisory Board and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute Australasian Advisory Board, is a national member of the Champions of Change Coalition and a founding member of the B Team Australasia and Climate Leaders Coalition. She is a passionate advocate for sustainability and the role that businesses must play in creating and implementing agendas that positively impact both people and the planet, becoming a true force for good. The best advice she was ever given was, when you are dancing on thin ice, you may as well tap dance. And that is how she lives her life with her husband, Graham, and their two children, Kira and Lachlan. Now, please join me in welcoming the hugely impressive Nicky Sparshott.
Oh, thank you so much, Karen. There's a lot crammed into that. That just probably talks about my age more than anything else. But I also want to recognise the custodians of the land that I'm on, and it is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'm doing this from Balmain. And in the spirit of the wonderful stories that our First Nations people tell, I thought that today, rather than sharing a whole lot of slides, I would just tell you a little bit of the story of my career and what's enabled me to build a kind of international professional career, but also one that fills my bucket personally. And UTS has had a big role to play in that. So I really am delighted to be with you all here today.
Thank you so much, Nicky. It's truly an absolute honor to be hearing from you today. And our topic is forging an international career. Your professional success is undeniable, as we've all heard, and we'd love to hear more about your journey. So I'll really just hand it over to you now, but open that this is a conversation. I love that it's more of a fireside chat. And so everyone on the call, if you have questions, please put them through for Nicky, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. So let's begin.
Perfect. Excellent. I want to start by saying that I did not grow up thinking I want to be the CEO of a multinational corporation. So there is a little bit of serendipity in my story and a little bit of opportunity that was taken up that has led me here. But probably from a very young age, there were a few little truths for me that helped me make some choices around what I did. And, whether it was the love of trading, and from a very young age I would be the one with the lemonade stand, and then it was the the cake stall that migrated to the bedazzled t-shirts and all of that wonderful stuff that you do when you're a kid and trying to make some pocket money. But the love of trade and producing beautiful things or services that people find value in and brings a bit of joy to their life, something that's always been a passion of mine. The second truth, I guess, for me was this absolute curiosity in diversity, and whether that was diversity of cultures, diversity of religion, political environments. I grew up in a multicultural family, so I spoke French and Italian before I actually spoke English. That was what I was exposed to. There's always been this insane love of and interest in the melting pot that is really Australia and the globe. And then the third thing I would say is that I've always been a little bit of an activist. So I'm a really passionate believer today, but I can see now looking back that it started quite young, that when you are in business, you have this incredible opportunity, but a responsibility to be a force for good in the choices that you make, not just for the financial returns of your organisation, but to have a regenerative impact on planet and communities that you serve. And that's a great opportunity and a great privilege to be able to have. And so whether it was sort of being part of Greenpeace or Amnesty International, or actually really being very passionate about land rights for our First Nations people, this was something that was very much nurtured in my teen years, and something that I've taken through the choices I've made as I've taken up professional opportunities. So then I'll fast forward a little bit, and brings me to UTS, because when I finished school, I thought I had a few paths to choose from. At one stage, I thought I would do law, to be honest, because here's my guilty pleasure, is that I love listening to serial killer podcasts, right? So I used to always read that sort of thing. And it was the psychology actually behind it that I found particularly interesting. But I decided to do business because it actually just played to so many of the things that I was passionate about. And there was one subject in my undergraduate degree which was much more focused on international business. And that sparked my interest. Is there an opportunity here to combine my love of travel, my love of different cultures, and my love of business together in a way that I could build a really interesting professional and personal life for myself? And so I decided to do a master's in international business at UTS, because that allowed me to just really, I guess, consolidate my passion in that area. I know all of you have had time at UTS, but I tell you two little experiences as I did that master's. And one was that I got to do my first overseas assignment, because we were partnering with Austrade, and I got to work with Boral Gas, who was looking at sort of LPG at the time. I know nothing about energy and gas, but it was in China and Hong Kong, and that really piqued my interest. What is the opportunity for Boral in those two markets? And then I equally got an opportunity to work with a mining company. And again, know nothing about mining, but they were trying to sell their spiral equipment. So it's a certain type of kit that you have in the mining industry in South America and South Africa. And so with UTS and our small project team, we headed over to those markets to do research. And that was a tipping point for me. Being on the ground, taking everything that I had theoretically learned, but being able to apply it in real time, that was remarkable, and actually has really defined then the choices that I've made around the career moves I've taken as a result of that. It's that really hands-on, immersive experience that allows you to take a brand or a business, recognize that it's got a DNA of its own, but that the way it shows up in different markets, in different cultures, is different depending on the kind of environment that you're in. So should I pause there for a minute before I go into my kind of career choices that came as a result of that?
That's really great background, Nikki. And I find it so interesting that you've taken the theory that you learned from UTS and you thought, how can I combine my personal and professional ambitions and core values, love of travel, being hands-on. And it sounds like UTS really equipped you for your roles of, for example, when you were working in Hong Kong and China in a completely different industry when it came to mining with Boral. So very interesting background. And I think that probably leads us into the next stage of your career.
So then I very deliberately made a decision to work in a multinational environment. And the reason, because I guess I could have chosen a local Australian company or ASX listed or all of those sort of things, and they would have been huge merit in that as well. But I knew that I wanted to be able to participate in a multinational organisation because I also knew that I wanted to move abroad at some point in time and be able to, experience life in a country outside of Australia. And so, as you would have heard, I've sort of worked with Procter & Gamble, and I've worked with the Coca-Cola company, and I've worked with Unilever. But my first overseas assignment actually was with the Coca-Cola company, and I went across to London. So having worked on the Sydney Olympic Games here for Coca-Cola, which was great experience in and of itself, I headed over to at the point, it was January 2001, I think. So that sort of says something. And it was dark and dreary, and I landed in London, but I was so excited. I must have been the only Australian in London who did not know another Australian in London. So it was really kind of pulling myself out of my comfort zone. But that was a brilliant opportunity because not only did I work across the UK, but it was my first experience of also working across Europe more broadly. So I started to now, expand beyond my Australian and New Zealand experience and started to get some really practical experience across the UK and Europe. And one of the tips I would share here for any of you that are deciding to go abroad was it was quite handy to do it that way because I could keep some things constant. The company was the same, the kind of brands and the work that I was doing was the same. I was in marketing at that point in time, but then the environment was different. But it was English speaking, so that was a little bit easier to start to immerse yourself in life outside there. My second assignment actually was still with the Coca-Cola company, but it was in Hong Kong. So I moved to Hong Kong to take up an opportunity to work across the tiger economies, actually. So the brief was how could we take certain brands in the Coca-Cola portfolio and leverage their growth potential across the emerging tiger economies. And so that was a very, very different experience. And I also managed to meet my husband when I was in London, which is always a nice thing as well, and a real highlight of my time abroad. When I came back to Australia, because we did decide to come back to Australia for a whole host of reasons, I actually jumped ship. So I went from client side into agency world. But again, I did it quite deliberately. I worked for a company that had a lot of global clients so that I could work on business opportunities and pitches that were beyond just ANZ. So again, working, with our colleagues in Japan, in the UK, in China, in other parts of the world to pull together global pitches. And that, again, just gave me a different dimension of what internationalization looks like. And what I know for sure is there is no one size fits all. The inconvenient truth is that there is not one homogenous community. What you need to do is to find the similarities that allow you to create efficiency and to be effective, but to absolutely and with equal passion find the differences that actually matter, because that is how you create connection with real people. I'm a big believer that you might have global brands, but we serve local people. And that is, I think, really, really important when you think about any sort of international opportunity that you take up or any opportunity you take up in a different country. And then Unilever is where, my heart is. I've been with Unilever for 16 years now, but worked, and I couldn't imagine staying in any company for 16 years, to be really honest, but I love the values of the organisation. But equally, I've worked in many different business models, different countries for Unilever. And when I moved to Singapore, it was to take up a role across the Asia Pacific region, running our ice cream business, which was fantastic. 25 different ice cream brands across the Asia Pac region. So spending time in Pakistan and India, in Japan, in China, in Southeast Asian markets, as well as Australia and New Zealand. So that kept me, with a footstool right in my hometown, which is always a really good thing to be able to do. But I've always believed, and I think this is probably the second tip that I would share, is there used to be a time, and it's quite archaic, where I think everyone was encouraged to climb this sort of corporate career ladder, but I don't like to think of it like that. I really like to think about it much more like a rock climbing wall, where sometimes you move up you take an opportunity to move forward in your career and maybe it's in a similar path. Sometimes you go sideways because you're trying to diversify the experience that you have and sort of put different tools in your toolkit. And sometimes you might even take a little bit of a step back just to go deeper into an area that is completely out of your comfort zone, but is going to be really incredibly important capability for you to build in order to properly leapfrog moving forward. And I do think I would encourage everyone to sort of think about your career as a collection of wonderful experiences, some that will no doubt be more rewarding than others, but all of which will give you really valuable insights and learning to take forward. And then that brings me to my T2 job. So having spent much of my time in what I would call bigger multinational corporations, so your P&Gs, your Cokes, and your Unilever for sure, I had the opportunity to take on the CEO role for T2. I don't know how many of you are familiar with T2, but a luxury sort of tea and gifting brand. It was born in Melbourne, and my job at the time was to globalize it. So how do we create a T2 generation on every continent? So move it just beyond our Australian and New Zealand borders, where we had presence when we acquired the business, to giving it global reach. How do we diversify its channel footprint beyond just bricks and mortar retail stores that you may have been in, but to actually create that e-commerce global presence so that we could be in 100 plus people, countries and lives across the world? And then how do you create the right infrastructure? Because this was moving T2 from a smaller organization to now a much larger one, which requires a different set of capabilities to be able to do that well. And that also gave me experience beyond, I guess, the UK and Europe, beyond the Asia Pac experience that I'd had, because we launched in the US. So it was the first time I really got to experience what the US was like as a market. And that's like many countries in one. It was the first time I started to understand China really deeply as a market. And that's many, many countries in one in many ways. And it was the first time that I had experience with the Middle East, and how we could start to build real luxury presence for T2 in the Middle East market, and obviously looking at different business models. So, moving into franchise models, into direct to consumer models, etc. So that's a bit of the career. Probably the last thing I would sort of end on, and then I'm really happy to sort of open it up for any questions that you have, is I came home to Sydney recently to take up the role. I say recently, it was just over 2 years ago, to take up the role of CEO for Unilever in Australia and New Zealand. And that was a gift, right? To be able to come back to your home market, having spent a lot of time outside it, and to lead a company like Unilever that has so many different categories that we play in, and so many different brands, and some really wonderful people, local manufacturing. So really sort of touching many different walks of life. That was a joy. And it also allowed me to make a choice that was super important to me for my family. So I have my kids who are in high school. They have travelled around the world with us, but at a point in time, we had promised them that we would give them the stability that they really wanted as they finished their high school years. And I remember, how important my friends were at that point in time, and having those really established networks. And so we came back to Sydney, and that's really important, I think, for any woman or any man that's making choices about their career, is how do you find that sweet spot between what you want to do that enriches your sort of career self, but equally really enriches your personal self. And the reality is, I think you can have it all. You just maybe can't have it all at the same time, right? There are certain inflection points where you make choices, one over the other. And then the last thing that you would have heard about, I guess, in my bio is just some of the boards that I sit on. And again, that is also for me really important, because I'm a really big believer in beginner's mindset. If you think about it, it's a sort of a very martial arts concept, right? If you just turn up to a fight as if you've never fought before, because that keeps you really alert and really open. And I think sort of the 26 years of experience that I have could be my biggest strength. but it can equally be my biggest blind spot that I bring to the table, because I think I've seen it before. I think I have a solution. And so actually, by sitting on advisory boards, by sitting on other boards, by working and surrounding myself with people that are way more expert than I am, I keep that beginner's mindset so that I don't inadvertently make a decision that's not relevant today, because things have changed and are changing so profoundly. I might stop just there and see at this point in time if there are any questions that are top of mind for you that I can assist with.
There have been a few questions that have come through, but firstly, Nicky, I just want to say thank you for sharing your experience, your background. You've had such a colourful, dynamic career journey, both globally and also more recently coming back to Australia. It's really impressive to hear. And someone like myself who is considering moving overseas for work, having been in my company now for 6 years, working for a global company as well, it's just really refreshing hearing that it's almost like it's timing, just making those considerations, taking those opportunities, and then coming to things with a beginner's open mindset. I think that's such a powerful thing. Like, I'm a really big supporter of Carol Dweck's growth mindset. And so just everything that you honed in on, even just the part about, change for good and starting early as well. I think a lot of us on the call today, we are, recent graduates of UTS, Young Alumni. And so we're looking to pave the path forward and thinking about what are those micro actions that we can take now within our own ability, within our own right, that we can start to channel energy into. So it's really refreshing to hear that you can make those decisions and have that impact early on, and you don't realize where those next steps will come or those next opportunities.
Totally.
I'd love to ask, potentially, were you tapped on the shoulder, or did you have a mentor or sponsor or someone who kind of encouraged you to take that step when you first had your big opportunity in the UK? Just curious to hear about that, because we do talk a lot about mentorship and sponsorship as one of those key components of uplifting others. So maybe that's something I'd love to hear about.
Yeah, sure. Maybe let me start there. So a few things that I think are really important. No one's going to be as passionate about your own career as you are. So the first thing I would say is to dream big for yourself. That sort of idea of goals are dreams with deadlines. Think about what it is that gets you up in the morning, and then construct what you think is going to help you create impact, but also bring you joy. Then absolutely, for me, I had some really good people that were able to give me some really good advice. They were able to give me good counsel when I needed it. They were also able to keep me grounded when I needed it, and they were able to be a source of both expertise in the sort of career choices they make, but also in leadership. From one role to another country, there are cultural considerations that you're stepping into. The what and the how is really, really, really important. That would be my first thing. And then I would say try to get some buddy systems happening. So, there's probably friends that you have that are thinking about the same thing. I would try to create sure mentors and coaches have been valuable to me.
That's a really great response. Sorry, there was a part that kind of broke down a little bit. I think the connection was just a bit wavy, but I love what you mentioned about accountability as well. I recently read Atomic Habits by James Clear, and that accountability partner is such an important thing, and knowing the what and the why, like Simon Sinek. So you mentioned as well a bit about, rock climbing, bouldering, and kind of that analogy of it's not so much the corporate ladder anymore and climbing up. There's so many skills that you can develop looking sideways and taking up opportunities, maybe outside of your core role as well. It sounds like now that you've done a lot on boards and your involvement in charities, how impactful have those roles been for you for either your core role or your international experience?
They've been really valuable. And I'll tell you what, because firstly, a problem shared is a problem halved. You realise that actually some of the challenges that you're facing as a leader, that you're facing in your function, that you're facing in your business are problems that many others are also facing. So the ability to kind of share generously and steal shamelessly from the good advice that comes your way is really valuable. So I would say that's been key. But also there's so much about transferable skills, because I've learned more about ideas to take into Unilever from industries that are outside of FMCG than I have necessarily from the FMCG industry. So it is that, again, just outside in perspective can be so valuable for your organisation. And then the last one is a personal one. You just meet very cool people. And I probably would not have crossed paths with them if I had kept myself in just the sort of CEO lane that I'm currently in. So that network is great. I mean, it's, network is great for professional purposes, but I've actually found it just really awesome for personal reasons. Just made some good friends and met really cool people who have just added something new to my life.
Yeah, Nicky, I love your mindset, and I love your focus on lifelong learning, keeping yourself open. And it sounds like you've worked across many different industries and you've taken those learnings, and it's not industry specific, but you've opened yourself up to say, hey, where are some of the ideas and learnings I can take from each industry and bring that forward? So I think one key theme that I'm hearing a lot is around the mindset and openness to taking up opportunities, especially when you're looking at relocating, moving global. I think that's a big consideration, both personally and professionally. So we have some questions flowing in right now. So there is one around someone's looking to potentially move to the UK. It's an Australian-only company. They do have dual citizenship and have worked in the UK in the past, but they're a little bit nervous heading over without a new job secured. So it's that rationale of, stepping into a new country or a new place, no job landed, very daunting, especially with the global political and, environmental situation that we're in. So what's some maybe advice or tips that you can give this person?
Sometimes when I'm confronted with a decision like that, I think about it in the context of sort of one-way doors versus two-way doors. So is this a one-way door that if you decide to pack up and move to London, you're completely stuck? Or is there a way you can make it a two-way door so that you give it a go, but if it doesn't work out, you also know that you've got a plan to come back? So obviously not knowing your personal circumstances or the situation you're in, that's what I would take some time to do, is to just think, is there a scenario where you could move to the UK and give yourself 3 to 6 months to see if you can, secure the job and have that sort of adventure that you're looking for? At which point, if it does work out, then that's brilliant. And if it doesn't, then you can come back, and anyway, it would have been a life experience probably worth having. But that's how I like to think about sort of these type of decisions.
That's a great way to think about it. And I think at times the little voice in our head can overthink and think of the best scenario and catastrophize and think of the worst. And a lot of times you never kind of end in those either spectrums, but I love that you're coming into it with the rationale of, hey, giving yourself a set timeline, 3 to 6 months, and then maybe writing down the kind of pros and cons and being quite, thoughtful about the process. Another question kind of a bit more around family. So do you think that there's the right time within your career to maybe start a family? I know now people are saying the 30s are your new 20s. So how established do you have to be in your field, do you think, to start considering having a family, or when is it the right time? I know it's a bit of maybe more of a personal question. I feel comfortable answering.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the 40s are the new 20s. So I feel like I'm going to keep pushing that, all around. This is probably not the answer you want to hear, but it's such a personal decision, isn't it? To decide when you want to have a family and what's right for you. What I would say is don't deny yourself of the opportunity to do it because of a career. I actually think you should work through what's right for you personally and have a really good conversation with the company that you're in, to say that this is something that you're planning to do. There should not be penalties for women who decide to take time out to have families, nor for men actually who increasingly want to play more of a caregiving role, but it's also a little bit countercultural at the moment. So we need to be able to help women not feel like they're slowing down just because they're having a child. And we also need to help men feel that they can take time off to support their partners during this time as well. So I don't think there is a perfect time. but I do think you want to try to work for an organisation that doesn't put you in a situation where you're forced to decide whether one is more important than the other.
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned one thing earlier around having it all, and it really does seem like the way that you've had your international career, the different roles that you've had, the beautiful family that you have, that you really have been able to, but it's also the timing aspect. It's different times you pull down those different levers. And like you said, the organization is really important. Do they have good maternity, paternity policies? Do you have a supportive manager that actually recognizes that stepping away for 6 months or a year is not a detriment to your progression and your promotion? So I think that's so important to have that understanding of the values within the company. And again, that's probably something that within the policies can be changed and implemented more. So, but yeah, thank you for that answer.
And be brave, I guess, as well about having those conversations, because it sounds a bit rose tinted, but if there have been moments over the course of my career where I've had to have some really interesting conversations around this, where I've had people say to me, Nicky, you could have a stellar career in this organisation, but I need to know whether you're prioritising family or career. And, I've had to find the agency to say, if I was a man, you would not ask me that question. And I don't need to be making the choice. I want to have both, but I equally understand that I'm going to need to make some trade-offs myself to be able to do both really, really well. But that's not for the company to tell you how to do it. That's for you to think through what's right for you and your family.
Yeah. And it's great that you actually spoke up in those situations as well, because again, like you said, those questions wouldn't technically be asked for someone of a different gender. So it's actually speaking up and being an advocate of having that voice during those times, and then being really honest and realistic with yourself, whether that is the right company or role for you, if that's kind of the way that they're coming to the table.
That's right.
With that offer. So we've got a question here from Bernice around sharing some insights and learnings of working with different people from different backgrounds. You've worked in various different markets, different industries, launching different products. So you would have seen and experienced a lot of different cultural backgrounds and just experiences. So what was your way of dealing and managing through that and getting the best outcomes during those times?
So when I was growing up, my mother used to say to me, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, use it in that ratio. And I am pretty sure that I would have ignored her, right, all through my teenage years. But it's actually proven to be some of the best bit of advice, I guess, that I've ever had. And it sounds simplistic, but really taking the time to learn from the team that you're leading or that you're part of, to learn about the customers or the consumers. I don't like the word consumer, but the person that you're serving with, the business that you have or the product that you're making, the service that you're delivering is really, really important. And when I first moved to Singapore, I had this little aha moment, because I had moved over to take on this role, but my husband hadn't started his job. So we had this couple of weeks where I had the luxury of being able to overinvest a little bit more time at work, because he was at home and with the kids, he was able to sort of manage that, which was lovely, when you first take on a new role and those first few, months can be hard. So I had taken the opportunity to have later nights and all of that kind of good stuff. And that was my personal choice. But what I didn't appreciate was I was in the office and my team was still there, and it was 8 o'clock at night and people are still there, and I realized maybe a week into this that they were waiting for me to go, because culturally they felt that they couldn't leave the office before I could. And when you overlay that with the fact they didn't know me well, I'd just come over, we had no real personal relationship, we didn't have any professional history. So they didn't have any reference points around how, Nicky makes her decisions or how she prioritizes or how she works. And when the penny dropped, I had to be really upfront. I brought people together and I said, let me tell you a little bit about myself. Let me tell you, I'm married, I've got 2 children. My husband hasn't started his job yet. So I had a little bit of time to overinvest. That's why I've been working late. I don't expect you to do the same. In fact, I'm going to start leaving early now, so you have the space to do it. That's a really small example, but the cumulative impact of lots of examples like that makes a difference in terms of how you you show up appropriately in different business and cultural environments.
I think how you mentioned just giving that space and building that trust. A lot of times we set these barriers, right? When we don't understand another community or person or individual, it's really easy to set those boundaries yourself and create that that kind of mental block or idea of how things should be and how you show up. So it sounds like you were able to kind of break down some of that by just honestly having open, authentic conversations and being quite vulnerable with your team and the people that you were working with and in your environment. So I think that's super powerful. I've seen that personally myself within some of the senior leadership within Google as well. Mel Silver, for example, she spearheads that herself constantly with the way that she shows up, speaks about her family, and just is a very raw and authentic leader. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned as well, you talked a lot about your activism, that activism is something that you've had kind of within from an early age. You always kind of felt like a champion of change, and something that was kind of a seed that was built in early on. Within your kind of roles across different boards and as a CEO, what are the spaces that you see where you can see employees having an opportunity to harness their own activism? So are there grassroots measures or platforms that are enabling employees to also enable their activism?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, our North Star at Unilever is about making sustainable living commonplace. And when you do that, it is about making sure that the way we produce the products that we make are done in not just a sustainable way, but a regenerative way. And that has really material implications on the choices you make through the supply chain, through the value chain, right through from sustainable sourcing of ingredients to the way you manufacture, to the way you distribute, logistics, your net zero emissions, the use of plastics. So there's a really very material set of choices that we make, and our team members are super empowered to live and breathe that in the choices that they make every day. I mean, as a CEO, there's very little I can do on my own, actually. I am really, my job is in the service of others and helping them to unleash their superpowers so that they can deliver some of this great stuff that we want to do on the planet. Equally, we want to contribute to a fairer and more socially inclusive world. And we can do that starting in our own backyard, what our own diversity, equity, and inclusion policies are at Unilever, the way that we choose to recruit, the way that we choose to market our products, the platforms that we are and aren't on. All of that sort of stuff starts at home. And I really feel that idea of distributed leadership, where leadership is not sort of the people sitting around the C-suite table. Leadership is best defined by the kind of impact you can have, and impact comes from anywhere in the organisation. So creating the right platforms and the right opportunities for people to share their ideas, to raise issues, to table solutions, and to feel that they've been heard, that they're actually being actioned, I think is really valuable. And I think at Unilever we're good at that, and I'm sure we're not perfect at it. I don't think we ever become perfect at that. I think there is that continuous improvement mindset, but we certainly are very deliberate about the strategies that we employ, the policies that we put in place, so that anyone that works at Unilever feels like the impact that they can have every day is meaningful. And do you know what? The ripple effect is profound, right? If everybody does just something little, then the impact can be really, really great. And I know sometimes you look at what's happening in the world right now, it can feel overwhelming, can't it? That there's just so much that's fractured that you kind of wonder, how can you make a difference from your own desk or behind your own laptop, or in your role in a factory or out in the field. And but the reality is, if everyone does one or two things, then that's one step that gets you closer up that mountain.
I love that. It's really about how you show up, and especially during this time where there is so much that's beyond our control. There was a concept that was shared with me recently around locus of control, around internal, external factors. And I love that, if we can just do those 2 or 3 things that are within our control, like you said, within the organization, it's a bottoms-up approach. There is leadership and activism within all the different levels and so many initiatives that you can take part in. So I think, if it's that one thing, and on the theme of International Women's Day, breaking the bias, if there's one thing that you can take up to drive some of those initiatives of activism within your own right, I think go for that. We are almost reaching time. Nikki, I do have one final question for you. If you could go back in time and give a 20-something-year-old Nikki some advice when she was a student at UTS, what would that be?
Oh, wow. Okay. Do you know what it would be? Is that fear and exhilaration are two sides of the same coin. Those moments when you feel most overwhelmed and most scared to do something are probably also going to be those moments where you look back and you feel pride and exhilaration at having conquered your fear. So there's been moments along the way, I call them sliding doors moments, because I think I took something up that honestly just scared the hell out of me at the time. I wondered if I had made the right call. People were saying to me, gosh, Nikki, are you sure you want to do this? And then when people ask me those questions, they're probably the moments I reflect on and go, they had the most significant impact on my life, for good and bad. So that would be it. Fear and exhilaration are two sides of the same coin. Just lean into it.
I love that. Just lean into it, take that roller coaster. And I love that description of fear and exhilaration in such a positive way as well. It's just almost that nervous excitement of what's to come. So take up this opportunity. Nikki, I just wanted to say a massive, massive thank you for the conversation and time today. I know you have a very busy schedule, especially with International Women's Day. So on behalf of the UTS Young Alumni Committee and all of UTS, thank you. Thank you very much for your time and so much for sharing with all of us.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and happy International Women's Day, everyone.
Thank you. So it has been truly a delight to speak with you, and we are incredibly grateful for the insights that have been shared across today's session. A lot of takeaways that I personally took from Nikki about your openness to just take up those opportunities, to be really quite open-minded for what those outcomes might be, and then to also just look at the levers in different life moments and life stages. And sometimes you don't need to have everything laid out, but sometimes it's just right to take that opportunity and have a bit of a plan and just go for it. It might be nervous and exhilarating, but let's give it a try. Exactly that. So for everyone on the call, give it a go. Make that one commitment of taking that opportunity. And from everyone across UTS Young Alumni Committee and UTS, thank you so much for your participation and the questions today. There have just been a few links that have been shared about joining the UTS Young Alumni Committee, and then also the UTS Young Alumni Committee LinkedIn group. So we'd love to stay connected. We'd love to see you at one of our future events. So do stay in touch. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you once again for the time, and hope you have a wonderful International Women's Day. Thank you.